Hi there, this is Karush from tweakguides.com. I thought I'd prepare a comparison video that highlights an issue that a lot of people are experiencing in Watch Dogs, which is namely the stuttering and hitching that most systems, even the best ones, experience. But what I'll do first up is set all my options to the maximum possible graphics quality, and we'll see how that performs on an older system. I'll discuss the system specs a bit later on. So the two areas where we look at for graphics options in Watch Dogs are under display and graphics quality, and we'll look at the display. Now here I've set things up pretty much, I'll discuss them a bit later on, but pretty much with Ultra, which is the highest texture quality you can get, and Temporal SMAA, which is a reasonable anti-aliasing level. But under graphics quality, everything here is the maximum possible you can have. Motion blur and depth of field is left up to pretty much people's choice, but everything else here is maximum possible quality. Now let's see how that sort of configuration runs on an older system. And the system I've got is one I put together back in January 2009, consisting of an i7-920 CPU, quad-core CPU with 2.8 GHz standard speed under load, 6 GB of system RAM, 1.5 GB of video RAM in my GTX 580 that I got 4 years ago. So the whole system is something that would probably be described as low to medium end by today's standards. It's served me pretty well, and I think people may be wondering why I haven't upgraded for so long. It's because the games of today really don't thrill me very much. Watch Dogs has caught my interest because I like open world games, and it's supposed to be a next gen game, so it'll be interesting to see how the graphics compare. And as you can see, at ultra level here, with everything on maximum, it doesn't look too bad. I'm not sure about the next gen tag, but the textures there you can see, nice brick textures, tile textures, but first thing you notice is that on this system, with maximum settings and ultra textures, it's completely sluggish. What people would call lag. But it's a combination of low frame rates and a lot of stuttering and hitching. And let's see if we can get that to demonstrate a bit better as I wander around. You can see that the detailing in the game world is pretty good. I'm not sure if you call it next gen, but it's not too bad. It's visually impressive. But again, everything that you see is sort of tainted by the fact that it's stuttering and hitching every few seconds. Now, one of the things people commonly describe with Watch Dogs is massive amounts of stuttering when you try and drive a car. So let's see if we can commandeer a car here. Let's see if I can pick something out that looks reasonably fast. Here we go, we'll try this one. Now let's go for a long drive and see if we can get it to hitch and stutter a bit more. There's the first major hitch. Here's another one. And you can see as more and more information is being loaded into the video RAM and then swapped out from new information as we move to different parts of the game world, it keeps hitching, which means it basically pulls up a little bit, freezes the game while it's loading data into VRAM. And the frame rates aren't very good. I wouldn't call this a pleasurable experience. It's pretty much unplayable. I mean, I can't even control the vehicle properly because every few seconds I'm pausing and then jumping forward a few frames. Let's see if we can get a better car here. Looks a bit nicer. But no, I mean, I'd rate this unplayable. And this is on a low end system, so you might say to yourself, well, that's not unexpected. You know, if you're going to run something like a next gen game on a 4 to 6 year old system, you might expect it to, with maximum settings, you might expect it to stutter and hitch and have low frame rates. But I think we'll be surprised as we go along with some of the impacts that just changing one setting will have. Bit of a homicidal maniac there. I thought I'd kill someone randomly just for fun. But no, this is pretty much unplayable. So let's go back to the options. And you can't change all the options unless you quit back to the main menu. Some of them are locked. So let's go back to the options and let's see if we can change one setting. And that's just the textures. Change that down to high, which is supposedly for cards with only 2 GB of video RAM rather than ultra, which is for 3 GB of video RAM. Everything else here remains the same, which is on maximum possible. So let's load that up. The key here is to try and see if it makes any real difference just to change the textures. Because is it the textures? Is it the other settings that are causing the slowdown? Is it a combination? It's not really clear. But one of the other things we want to note is how much of a change just changing the textures makes to the visual quality. And that'll be interesting to see. Now the textures don't look too bad at high compared to ultra. The bricks still have a bit of depth. Tiles aren't too flat. But unfortunately the frame rates look like they're still pretty low. Still get a bit of stuttering and hitching here. There we go, there's a big hitch. Now the ground textures look fine. It's not a major drop in image quality compared to ultra. The key here is to try and see whether it actually reduces the stuttering and hitching as we wander around the game world. So let's have a wander and see what we find. Seems to have smoothed out a little bit, especially on foot here. There's not much in the way of slowdowns. Hacking the old steam pipes under the grates there to blow up some people. Always good for a laugh. Now, let's see if we can grab a car, because the test will be whether when we're driving around quickly, whether it's playable or not. Keeping in mind that I've got a system with only 1.5 GB of VRAM on my graphics card, and this setting is supposed to be for systems with 2 GB or more of VRAM. So it's not hopeful, but still worth trying. Alright, let's give this guy the heave-ho and grab his car. Alright, run down a pedestrian just for kicks, and it's already a lot smoother than Ultra. You can see it's not hitching very often. But whether it's playable or not, let's drive a bit further and find out. The hitching's getting worse. That's just my poor driving. Everything here is destructible, which is a nice touch in Watch Dogs. Pretty much everything can be destroyed. So it makes the game world seem a lot more alive. Now it seems to be reasonably smooth. Whether it's playable or not, depends on what you classify as playable, but it's not horrendous. And keeping in mind, I've only got 6 GB of system RAMs too, so, and an Intel SSD. So we're looking at my drive light. It's not loading a lot from my drive. It's not the drive that's slowing things down. It's just that there's not enough VRAM to hold all the information, and it just needs to be refreshed too quickly for the VRAM, which causes hitching. But on foot, it's not too bad. So I'd call this marginally playable. If you were really sort of keen not to sacrifice too much image quality, you could stick it on high. If you've got a graphics card with more than 2 GB of VRAM, then high would definitely be a good compromise compared to Ultra. Let's see if we just take him down. The mouse is actually difficult to control in game. I think there's some mouse acceleration in the game. But anyway, that was reasonably playable. Now let's reduce one setting and see how things go. Let's reduce textures again from high to medium, keeping everything else the same. So temporal SMAA and the graphics quality, everything on maximum possible. And see what sort of an impact that has on stuttering and hitching. I mean, I suspect it's going to reduce the stuttering and hitching. But let's also see what sort of an impact it has on graphics quality, because obviously it's also going to probably reduce the texture quality quite a bit. And it has. It's made the world, surfaces on the world look blurrier. The bricks, the door, the leaves on the ground are just a blob. But it looks to have also made a difference to the performance. Frame rates are up. Game seems responsive. There's only one way to find out, which is to have a walk around. And the texture detailing doesn't look too bad from a distance. Even at medium, it doesn't look blurry like it does in a lot of games, which I suppose is why they called it medium rather than low, because it actually is sort of a medium setting. But so far, no hitching, no stuttering, no drops in frame rate, and textures seem acceptable, although up close, if we have a look at that billboard, they do look blurry. So there has been a reduction in, and lovely, there's a lady puking in the background. Charming. Has been a reduction in visual quality from the texture setting being dropped to medium. Now the ultimate test for checking stuttering and hitching is to get into a car. So I'll just borrow this person's car, thank you. And we'll go for a drive down the same road that we went before. So far so smooth. Let's switch the camera angles around to see if I can induce some stuttering and hitching. And no, it looks like it's perfectly smooth. So just from lowering one setting, just from lowering textures from ultra to medium, from ultra to high to medium, you've gone from an unplayable stuttering mess to something, let's grab that car, to something that's quite smooth. So it's pretty clear that the texture setting is the culprit. I need to point out at this point that I'm recording the game using Fraps because my GTX 580 doesn't support NVIDIA Shadow Play. So I'm recording using, I wish I could drive. Recording using Fraps, and that's recording 1920 by 1200 uncompressed full frame video to the same drive that I'm actually playing on. So it is an Intel SSD, it's a fast drive, but I'm recording onto the same drive that the game is loading data off constantly. There's a lot of information being written to and read from the drive, and that's still not inducing hitching, all because we lowered the texture setting. So that indicates, again, two things. First of all, textures is the culprit, at least on my system, and I'd say on most systems, is the culprit behind most of the stuttering and hitching, if not all of it. But second of all, it also indicates the game's reasonably well optimized. And I know that's not what people want to hear. I know it's a classic case of people calling a game unoptimized if it doesn't run perfectly on low-end hardware. You know, if you don't get 100 frames per second on an old card, then it's not optimized. If you read forums, that's generally the opinion. But I think it's actually reasonably well optimized. Except for the texture setting, which, a bit of hitching there, I'd say that's from drive, using the same drive to record on as the game's playing from. But I'd say that there is a texture management issue. There's no question that aspect isn't optimized. It's either a bug or they just haven't designed it with PC in mind. I mean, there's no question the game's a console port. It does look quite pretty, it's visually impressive, but as people have noted in a lot of videos around YouTube, there are missing effects, shadows missing, glitches, things that indicate that, you know, the physics being not as good as it could be. Things that indicate that it was originally designed for limited hardware in the consoles rather than PC. So it's a console port. We just have to face that reality. But it doesn't look too bad, considering how good it looks and how well it's running on a 4-year-old GPU. You'd have to say that's actually reasonably well optimized. Now, the texture management issue has been kind of tacitly acknowledged by Ubisoft because they mentioned that they are looking at fixing performance issues in the game, and this is the number one performance issue I'd say most people are having. So they will be issuing a patch for it, and I'd wager that it's going to help the issue to some extent. My concern is that any effort to fix this issue might result in sort of more obvious texture streaming and popping. Because they might do a quick and dirty fix. So at the moment, Watch Dogs doesn't have any visible texture streaming. You can't walk along the street and see textures, surfaces going from being blurry or black to suddenly appearing, as they do in a lot of other games. It does have object popping that is a bit more noticeable, but generally speaking, the game seems a lot more seamless than a lot of other games. So whether or not by fixing the issue they actually just reduce visual fidelity and the seamlessness of the game, we'll have to wait and see. Now there are three options, I suppose, while you're waiting for the patch, or if the patch doesn't do anything, there are three options you can choose if you want the game to run more smoothly. The first one is to reduce textures. We've already discussed that. Drop them down. Unless you've got 4 to 6 gigabytes of video RAM, don't use Ultra. If you've got 2 to 4 gigabytes of video RAM, high is a good compromise. If you've got less than 2 gigabytes of video RAM, I'd say stick to medium and just don't bother with anything other than that. You can play around with the other settings, but the stuttering and hitching, to my mind, is almost entirely induced by the texture setting. The other aspect you can look at is anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is designed to reduce the jaggedness and shimmering of edges and lines in the game. But it also uses a lot more video RAM the higher your level of anti-aliasing. So it can exacerbate the issue if you've already got a lot of data in video RAM being swapped in and out. If you choose a higher level of anti-aliasing, you will simply make the problem worse. You will get more stuttering and hitching. I'm using temporal SMAA at the moment, which is a pretty good compromise. It doesn't induce screen blurring like FXAA. And because it's temporal, that means it basically reduces the shimmering of lines as they're moving. So unlike normal SMAA, it actually helps reduce shimmering as objects move and as you move around the game world. And it seems to have a reasonably low performance impact. So it's good for low-end cards. It's also good for high-end cards if you just don't want to saturate the VRAM. Now, the other option is to upgrade your hardware or to stick another card in your system for SLI or Crossfire. First thing, upgrade. Not a good idea in my opinion. Not because Watch Dogs not worth it, that's a personal choice. More because we're on the cusp of a new generation of cards from Nvidia, the GTX 800 series, which is supposed to be released sometime in the end of this year, by the end of this year, probably in the next few months. It could be a bit later. But if you're buying a high-end card, you'll get buyer's remorse if you buy one and then 3 months later Nvidia releases a brand new generation of cards. Especially since the new generation is going to have, it's rumored to have 4 gigabytes or more of RAM, of video RAM. So it doesn't help if you want to improve performance in Watch Dogs to get a 3 gigabyte card, for example, a 780 or a 780 Ti GTX right now, and then find out that a few months later, not only a faster card, but one with more video RAM is coming out at roughly the same price. You could get an R9 290 from AMD that's got 4 gigabytes of video RAM. That's a good option. It's an expensive card, but it's cheaper than the Nvidia option, and it's also a good performer. You could get a Titan, which has got 6 gigabytes of video RAM if you've got the money to burn, and that would probably be a lot more future-proof. But I'd suggest waiting for the next generation to come out, if at the very least what it'll do is make the current generation drop in price. The other option is SLI or Crossfire. I'm not a big fan of either. It's not a preference which company you choose. It's just the fact that the technology in either form is really more of a brute force, sort of very inelegant, inefficient way of getting more performance out of two cards. The critical issue being, for Watch Dogs anyway, is that it won't increase your video RAM. If you use two GPUs with 2 gigabytes of video RAM each, for example, to SLI, you're not going to wind up with 4 gigabytes of video RAM. You're going to wind up with 2 gigabytes of video RAM because the graphics cards have to mirror the data in each card. So each card's video RAM is going to be the limit for the total video RAM you have. If you put two cards with 3 gigabytes of video RAM together in SLI, you're still going to only have 3 gigabytes of video RAM in total. So it's not a very efficient solution unless you happen to have cards laying around, or you happen to be able to grab a second-hand card cheaply. It's not one that I'd recommend. There are also issues with SLI and Crossfire in terms of driver issues in other games. Generally, I still steer clear of them. It's better if you can afford to buy the current top end single GPU, it'll last longer and it'll have a lot less problems. And if you can get one with more video RAM, then it'll also be more future proof. Now, the question most people seem to be discussing on forums right now is whether Watch Dogs is really a next gen game. And I suppose defining next gen is hard, but it's a good opportunity now, looking at these visuals, to see that there are aspects of the game that definitely look very impressive and next gen-ish. This sort of lighting that we're getting here, the vehicle reflections, the detailing in the game world, to me does say next generation. It is a console port, yes, it is limited by console hardware, but there have been enhancements given to the PC version which do make it quite impressive at times. Again, it's more a game of semantics, whether you want to call something next gen or not. I'd say it's certain aspects of the game definitely are next gen, certain aspects are not. It's not a perfect game. It's one of those games where you can pick all the faults and talk about the things that the game does wrong all day and all night. Or you can just sit down and just enjoy it, really. I mean, if you like open world games, if you like GTA style games, and I think Watch Dogs has something to offer. And it also depends on your play style. If you don't run through the campaign, and if you don't complete objectives and you wander around a lot more, then it can offer a lot more enjoyment than people who run and gun and basically try and get through the thing in a speed run. The commercial reality is developers are going to aim for the market which has the greatest number of sales, and right now that's consoles. We can complain about it all we want as PC gamers, but the reality is that that's what they're going to do, and the best way to make developers pay attention to PC gamers isn't to complain, it's to buy good games. And if you see a good game, I'm not saying Watch Dogs is one of them, but if you see a good game, buy it, don't pirate it, don't make excuses to pirate it. And if you don't know whether to buy a good game or not, watch a lot of reviews, read performance articles, and watch YouTube videos, and you'll get a pretty good idea of whether or not it's worth buying. That's the best way, I think, to make your vote count, is to vote with your wallet. In any case, I hope you found this video useful. Sorry about the boring and monotonous commentary. It's a lot harder to make video with commentary than I thought it would be. But thank you for watching. There's a whole bunch of resources for tweaking and finding out more about the game in the video description. So have a look below the video, and there are links to guides and more information about how you can optimize the game. And all that's left to say is, until next time, take care.